June 19th, 1953. Ossining, New York. The sun is beginning to set over the Hudson River. Inside the high, cold walls of Sing Sing prison, the air is thick with tension. In the execution chamber, the electric chair nicknamed Old Sparky is humming. Two people are waiting in their cells, a husband and a wife, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They are ordinary-looking people. He looks like an engineer. She looks like a housewife. They have two young sons, Michael and Robert, waiting at home. But the United States government says they are monsters. The government says they stole the secret of the atomic bomb. They say they gave it to Joseph Stalin, and for that crime, they are going to burn. This was not just a trial. It was a witch hunt. It was the climax of the Red Scare, a moment when America lost its mind. Welcome to the Shadow Dossier. Today, we open the file on the only American civilians ever executed for espionage. To understand why the Rosenbergs had to die, you have to understand the fear of 1950. The Soviet Union had detonated its first nuclear bomb, Joe-1, years ahead of schedule. America was in shock. They believed they had a monopoly on the apocalypse. How did the Russians get the bomb so fast? The answer was treason. Someone on the inside had handed them the blueprints. The FBI began a frantic hunt. They traced the leak from a scientist named Klaus Fuchs. Fuchs gave up a courier named Harry Gold. Harry Gold gave up a mechanic named David Greenglass. And David Greenglass gave up his sister and his brother-in-law, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Julius Rosenberg was a dedicated communist. He was an electrical engineer who believed that capitalism was evil. During World War II, he decided to help the Soviet Union. He wasn't just a sympathizer, he was an active recruiter. He ran a spy ring of engineers. They stole secrets about radar, sonar, and jet engines. But the Holy Grail was the Manhattan Project. Julius knew that his brother-in-law, David Greenglass, was working at Los Alamos. Greenglass was a machinist. He wasn't a physicist. But he had access to the molds used to shape the explosive lenses for the bomb. These lenses were the key. They focused the explosion inward. They created the implosion that triggered the nuclear chain reaction. In 1945, Julius asked David to write down what he knew. David drew a crude sketch of the lens mold. He wrote 12 pages of explanatory notes. He handed this sketch to Julius in a New York apartment. To verify their identity, the spies used a piece of tradecraft that is now legendary. They used a Jell-O box. Julius took a cardboard Jell-O box and cut it in half in a jagged pattern. He gave one half to David. He kept the other half. When the courier, Harry Gold, arrived in New Mexico to pick up the intel, he showed his half. The two pieces of cardboard matched perfectly like a puzzle key. It was low-tech. It was simple, and it worked. The sketch of the implosion lens made its way to Moscow. It helped the Soviet scientists confirm their own designs. It accelerated the Soviet bomb project by at least a year or two, but in 1950, the game was up. When the FBI arrested David Greenglass, he panicked. He wanted to save himself. And more importantly, he wanted to save his wife, Ruth. Ruth Greenglass had been part of the conspiracy. She had typed the notes. If David didn't cooperate, Ruth would go to prison. Their children would be orphans. So, the prosecutors made a deal with David. "Give us the ringleader. Give us Julius." David gave them Julius. But the prosecutors wanted more. They wanted to break Julius. They wanted him to name every other spy in his network. To do that, they needed a lever, a pressure point. That pressure point was Ethel Rosenberg. The evidence against Ethel was incredibly weak. She hadn't met with couriers. She hadn't stolen documents. She was a supportive wife. She knew about the spying. But under the law, that doesn't make you a mastermind. The prosecutors decided to charge her anyway. They hoped that if they threatened to execute his wife, Julius would confess. It was a hostage strategy disguised as justice. But Julius Rosenberg refused to break. He denied everything. He claimed they were innocent victims of anti-Semitism. He claimed they were being framed because of their politics. The FBI needed a witness to tie Ethel to the crime, so they went back to David Greenglass. They put the screws on him. Suddenly, David remembered a new detail. He testified that he saw Ethel typing the notes about the atomic bomb. He said she sat at a typewriter in their living room. She typed up the spy reports that Julius dictated. This testimony was the nail in her coffin. It turned her from a bystander into an active participant. David Greenglass sent his own sister to the electric chair to save his wife. Years later, he would admit he lied. He never actually remembered her typing. The trial began in March 1951. It was called the Trial of the Century. The judge was Irving Kaufman. He was determined to show that the justice system was tough on communists. The prosecutor was the infamous Roy Cohn, a ruthless young lawyer who would later become the mentor to Donald Trump. The atmosphere in the courtroom was hysterical. The Rosenbergs were portrayed not just as spies, but as the cause of the Korean War. Judge Kaufman, in his sentencing, made a statement that shocked the world. He blamed them for the deaths of thousands of American soldiers. He said, "I consider your crime worse than murder. You have altered the course of history to the disadvantage of our country." On April 5, 1951, the verdict came down. Guilty. The sentence was death. For both of them, this was unprecedented. Spies were usually given prison time. Klaus Fuchs, who stole far more important secrets, only got 14 years in England. But the US government wanted to send a message written in blood. They wanted to terrify any other potential traitors. For 2 years, the Rosenbergs sat on death row. There were appeals. There were protests around the world. The Pope asked for clemency. Albert Einstein asked for clemency. Thousands of people marched in Paris and London shouting, "Save the Rosenbergs!" They argued that the penalty was too harsh. They argued that the evidence was tainted. President Eisenhower was asked to intervene. He refused. He said, "The execution of 2 human beings is a grave matter. But even graver is the thought of the millions of dead whose deaths may be directly attributable to what these spies have done." The clock ran out. On the final day, the FBI offered them one last deal. A direct line was set up to the prison. "Confess," the agent said. "Give us names, and you can live." Julius and Ethel refused. They maintained their innocence to the very end. They said goodbye to their children. They wrote a final letter. "We are the first victims of American fascism." At 8 o'clock in the evening, the sun went down. The Sabbath was beginning. The execution had to be done before the Jewish Sabbath. Julius went first. He walked into the chamber. He sat in the wooden chair. He did not say a final word. The leather straps were buckled. The electrode was attached to his shaved leg. The mask was placed over his face. The switch was thrown. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body. His body convulsed against the straps. Smoke rose from his leg. After 3 shocks, the doctor checked his heart. He was dead. It was over in a few minutes. Then it was Ethel's turn. She was a small woman. The chair was too big for her. She sat down. The guards strapped her in. She had reportedly kissed the prison matron on the cheek before walking in. The switch was thrown. The current slammed into her. Her body tensed. The smell of burning flesh filled the room. The executioner gave her the standard 3 shocks. The doctors stepped forward to check her heart. They expected her to be dead. But she wasn't. Her heart was still beating. She was still alive. The doctors stepped back in horror. The executioner had to throw the switch again and again. They had to give her 2 more massive jolts of electricity. Eyewitnesses reported a gruesome scene. Smoke rose from her head. The straps cut into her skin. It took nearly 5 minutes to kill Ethel Rosenberg. It was a botched, brutal, and messy end. When the news broke, the world was divided. Some cheered. They believed justice had been done. Others wept. They believed America had murdered a mother for her politics. For 40 years, the question remained. Were they guilty? Or were they martyrs? The Rosenbergs' sons spent their lives trying to clear their parents' names. They believed their parents were innocent. But in 1995, the NSA declassified the Venona project. These were the intercepted Soviet cables from the 1940s. The cables were undeniable. They showed a spy network run by a man codenamed Liberal. Liberal was Julius Rosenberg. The cables proved, without a doubt, that Julius was a dedicated, active spy. He ran a ring. He recruited people. He stole military secrets. He was guilty. But the cables also told another story, the story of Ethel. In the Soviet documents, Ethel is mentioned, but she is not given a code name. She is referred to only as Liberal's wife. The cables suggest she knew about the spying. She supported it, but they do not show her stealing secrets. They do not show her typing the notes. The evidence suggests that David Greenglass lied about the typewriter. He invented the story to satisfy the prosecutors. Ethel Rosenberg was executed not for what she did, but for who she was. She was executed as leverage that failed. The government bluffed. They put a gun to her head to make Julius talk, but Julius didn't talk. And the government pulled the trigger. The tragedy of the Rosenbergs is a tragedy of fanaticism. Julius was a fanatic for communism. He sacrificed his wife for his cause. The prosecutors were fanatics for anti-communism. They sacrificed justice for a political victory. And in the middle, 2 children were left orphans. And a woman was burned alive in a chair that was too big for her. The sketch of the implosion lens that David Greenglass drew. Scientists later said it was crude. It was full of errors. It probably didn't help the Soviets as much as the Americans feared. The Russians had their own brilliant physicists. They would have built the bomb anyway. The Rosenbergs didn't really give the bomb to Stalin, but they gave their lives for the illusion that they did. Today, the Jell-O box is a museum piece. The electric chair sits empty. But the story serves as a dark mirror. It shows us what happens when fear takes over a courtroom.